By someone who doesn't do a lot of media interviews, but he has agreed to talk to us on this particular issue. Ken Wyatt is Australia's first and still only federal Indigenous MP for the Liberal Party. Ken Wyatt, thank you for joining us. Is there anything in this report today that particularly surprises you?
No, I think what I liked about the report was the maternal child health and the early years gains. I think they're significant. But other elements of the reports and what I've read, I think we've still got key areas yet to do further work on.
What concerns you the most? What area?
Actually, I'll tell you the area that really concerns me are the urban populations. Over 75% of Aboriginal people live within urban capital cities, and it's a key area we're going to have to do a lot more work in.
Because we talk a lot about remote communities, but you're right, there's the overwhelming majority are in urban areas of Indigenous Australians.
Well, one of my criticism of closing the gap is it is a tremendous initiative, but it doesn't capture people living in the urban context. So that's a gap in itself that we've got to address.
So is there a need for a similar approach to assessing, recording and tackling some of those urban problems?
No, I think there's a couple of things. One is we've got to look at the whole issue of access to government services, because government services are there for everybody. We've got to look at the way we engage the Aboriginal organisations and groups and families so that they become active participants in planning what's going to be provided and what they can access. When you're a passive recipient, you really don't shape your future.
You're talking there about empowering local communities more.
No, actually, I'm talking about empowering local individuals and families. Because if we think about all Aboriginal communities, they're units of families, and they're the greatest drivers for change. A community can make a decision, but if a family opts out, then that's problematic.
Now, one thing that we see in this report again is that Western Australia remains the worst state as far as youth Indigenous incarceration goes. How much does that concern you? And are you talking to your West Australian Liberal government colleagues there about the mandatory sentencing laws that they have?
When I was a senior public servant, I certainly raised issues within our department about incarceration rates. I think some of the young people that are incarcerated are in there for a range of issues, but we don't harness the opportunity either when they're in there to give them an educational pathway that'll bring them back out to jobs. I certainly would like to see a substantial reduction. I'd also like to see the implementation of diversion programs that lead them into work or training that will give them a job in the industries.
But is the mandatory sentencing regime working for Indigenous Australians?
Oh, look, I suspect in some parts it's not. The reasons for the implementation of the origins of that mandatory sentencing came at a time when there were some significant behaviours that had to be dealt with. Any community or any society looks at options for dealing with trending in crime, but I think that we've got to a stage now where we've got to look at diversion. So if somebody does have 3 strikes, then they shouldn't have got to that stage if we put diversions in at that first report, the first step, and then we should have guided them into pathways that would lead to the shortages that we've got in the work sector.
And should the Barnett government be doing more on that front then?
Look, I'm aware that there is work being undertaken to look at training within the prisons, but certainly some of the options now where significant mining companies have become partners in the way that young people are transitioning into workforce opportunities. But the other challenge in this, and this is an underlying issue, is that otitis media in the early years leaves that residual conductive hearing loss. So when young people apply for jobs and they go sit the hearing test, they fail. And for some workplaces, you cannot have somebody whose hearing is restricted because it goes to a knock health safety issue. So that's problematic. So we've got an issue down this end, but we've got to come upstream as well.
Just one of the many issues that Indigenous Australians are confronting there. On that issue you mentioned about mining companies getting involved in helping kids from the transition from school to the workplace, we are seeing an enormous mining boom going on in WA at the moment. Is enough being done by the mining companies and by state and federal governments to provide employment opportunities?
Look, I think the combination of the Commonwealth Government, certainly our state government in Western Australia, and the mining sector have been significant in the way in which they have devoted energy and effort and resources to engaging Aboriginal people into the workforces.
But you go to these remote communities, and in some of them, none of them have a job.
No, and part of it's their location. I think the other thing that we've got to look at is a fly-in, fly-out model. I know when I was talking with Noel Pearson, there was something that he was sharing with me is the fly-in, fly-out model that he's proposing for the Cape, and I think that we can do those in remote communities. We've got to think outside the square.
Is there a willingness to do that, though, do you think, in those remote communities?
Look, I know from my work in 3 fields that when I've worked with remote communities and you sit down and you talk with the community as a whole and talk about the opportunities, they're prepared to come on board. Every parent, and that includes all of our people, want to see their kids succeed. But what the challenge is the capacity and capability of doing that because of the economic circumstances they find themselves in.
Can I ask you where you stand on the debate over constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians? Tony Abbott, in his speech this morning, again expressed some reservation that this not be the end, the recommendations that we've had from the expert panel, but the start of the conversation. What do you think of the recommendations?
Look, what the report did was capture all of the options that were proposed in the consultations across the nation. We deliberately, as a panel, wanted to include all of those as a reflection of what had been said. The coalition itself...
So that doesn't mean you specifically agree with...
No, I'm not saying that. I think that many of the elements in that report have got merit for the future, but not for now. I think the recognition in the Constitution is an important commitment that the coalition has made. Certainly the other ones... that are referred to in those recommendations will go through a parliamentary process. We'll wait and see what the Prime Minister comes back to us with. And then I suspect that there will be strong tripartisanship in the final wording and question that goes to all Australians, because none of the political participants on that want to see failure. But we also know that there are options in that report that go beyond the scope of the current context for all Australians. And look, it's a report that's going to be there for another 50 years, and that's why it was written in the form to capture all those options.
And has the task of building community support for that been hurt at all by the Tent Embassy protest on Australia Day, which remains a political issue today?
No, look, I think, and what I respect about people in our country and Australians in general is that we will look at an issue and express either our disappointment or our disgust or our annoyance, but we often transcend those small events to look at the bigger picture, because I think that all of us love our country, all of us want the best possible outcome that reflects who we are as a nation and want the best outcome. And there are many people that have contributed to the reconciliation process, and there are many who are still coming on board wanting to be part of recognising the First Nations people. Ken
Wyatt, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Good to talk to you. After the break, we'll turn to more political matters. Laura Tingle and Michelle Grattan joining us. Stay with us.